I had not slept in a bed in 2 years, and I thought I would never again. That was what Max Muller, a young German POW, told himself every night as he lay on the cold, hard floor of a prison camp. The last time he had seen a bed was back in Germany, before the war had torn his life apart. Every day had been the same: dirt, hunger, and exhaustion. Then, one day, everything changed. Max had heard stories of what life would be like in American camps. Stories of cruelty, harsh treatment, and fear. The propaganda had painted a picture of brutal Americans, treating prisoners like animals. Max thought he knew exactly what to expect. But when he stepped off that truck, everything felt different. The air was warmer, the sun brighter, and the people who greeted him weren't what he had imagined. Sergeant Jack Thompson, a tall American with a weathered face and warm eyes, stepped forward as Max and his fellow prisoners arrived. He wasn't holding a weapon, nor did he look like a man who harbored hatred. Instead, he looked kind. As Max shuffled off the truck, shackled and exhausted, Sergeant Thompson's first words caught him by surprise. "You're gonna be okay here," he said, a simple promise, but one that made Max's heart skip a beat. Max was suspicious. How could a soldier speak to him like that? Was this some kind of trick? His mind raced with doubts. But then something unexpected happened. Sergeant Thompson offered him a small loaf of bread. It wasn't much, but it was a piece of food that wasn't stale, and Max hadn't seen anything like it in weeks. "Take it," Jack said. "It's fresh, you need it." Max hesitated for a moment before taking the bread. It felt real, it smelled like home. It was nothing like the bland, tasteless food he had been given in the camps back in Europe. After months of fighting hunger and despair, this simple act of kindness felt like a miracle. As he chewed, the food seemed to bring him back to life. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something other than fear and exhaustion. The bread was warm, and for the first time in years, Max felt warmth in his chest. But what happened next took him completely by surprise. Sergeant Thompson gestured toward a small building in the distance. "That's where you'll sleep tonight," he said. Max looked up, confused. He wasn't sure what to expect. He had seen the barracks in Germany, small, cold, and barely enough room for the prisoners to lie down. But when they arrived at the American barracks, Max couldn't believe his eyes. There, in front of him, were real beds, warm, soft beds. The kind he hadn't seen in years. Each bed had clean blankets, a pillow, and the promise of comfort. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure if this was a dream. Could this really be happening? "Go ahead," Jack said gently. "Get some rest. You've earned it." Max slowly walked to one of the beds and sat down. The mattress felt like a cloud beneath him. It wasn't perfect, but it was a bed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he lay down and closed his eyes, allowing himself to fall into a deep, peaceful sleep. The noise of the camp, the tension in his body, and the fear of what would come next faded away. In its place was something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the war. Max had been prepared for a life of suffering. But here, in this small corner of the world, he had found something he never thought possible: kindness, comfort, and the faintest glimmer of humanity. Max woke up the next morning feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: comfort. The sun was already high in the sky, but the cool breeze from the open windows kept the barracks at a pleasant temperature. As he opened his eyes and took in his surroundings, the clean walls, the soft bed beneath him, and the peaceful silence, he realized that he hadn't heard anything like it in years. Back in Germany, there was always the sound of bombs, the murmur of frightened prisoners, the clatter of metal and weapons. But here, everything felt different. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to shake off the disbelief that had been clinging to him since yesterday. Had it really happened? Had he really been treated like this after everything he had endured? His eyes scanned the room again, and there it was, a small table with a pitcher of water and a couple of cups. It was such a simple thing, yet it felt monumental. It was the kind of thing he never thought he would see again, something that symbolized care, something he had only heard about in stories. As Max sat up and swung his legs over the side of the bed, he noticed something else: a pair of worn boots neatly placed beside a cot. He stood up, his legs still a bit stiff from sleeping in a bed after so long, but the sensation was far less painful than it had been before. He felt human again. When he stepped outside the barracks, the morning light hit him, and he was hit with the unmistakable smell of fresh grass and earth. There were trees lining the camp, and he could hear birds singing in the distance. The American camp was a far cry from the cold, impersonal spaces he had come to know in Europe. It was alive. He walked slowly toward the main yard where he was told breakfast would be served. The camp was peaceful, with soldiers going about their tasks, not in a rush, but in a calm, almost casual way. The whole place seemed so normal. It wasn't what he had imagined. Max's thoughts were interrupted when he saw Sergeant Jack Thompson approaching him. The soldier smiled and waved. "Morning, Max. Sleep well?" he asked, his voice warm and friendly. Max nodded, still unsure of how to respond. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick from lack of use. I didn't know it would be like this." Jack chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Most people are surprised. We try to make it as comfortable as possible. You're a guest here." Max couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. He hadn't been treated like a guest in so long. It almost didn't feel real. Jack led him to the mess hall, where breakfast was already being served. The smell of bacon, eggs, and fresh bread filled the air. Max followed Jack inside, and for the first time in years, he felt his stomach growl, not from hunger, but from anticipation. The sight before him was almost overwhelming. The food was abundant and served on real plates, not the meager portions he had been given in the past. There were fruits, pancakes, and even coffee. It was a luxury he never thought he'd experience again. He sat down at a table with Jack and a couple of other soldiers, who greeted him with a nod and a smile. Max didn't know what to say. He had been taught to be wary of any kindness from the enemy. But now, in this strange new world, he found himself questioning everything he had believed. As they ate, Max slowly began to relax. The conversation was light, and he felt a strange comfort in the way the soldiers treated him. No one looked at him with disdain or hatred, and that was something he had not experienced in a long time. For the first time in 2 years, Max allowed himself to enjoy a meal without the constant fear of what might happen next. After breakfast, Jack took Max around the camp, showing him the different areas where the prisoners worked. There was a small garden, a laundry area, and even a place where soldiers trained. Max was surprised by how normal everything seemed. The camp was clean, organized, and there was a sense of purpose in the air. No one was just waiting for something bad to happen. For the first time since the war had begun, Max felt a glimmer of hope. He was still a prisoner, but he was treated like a person, and that meant everything. As they walked, Jack spoke to him about the future, about the possibility of going back home after the war ended. Max didn't know if he believed in that future yet, but for the first time, he felt like it was possible. That night, after a long day of getting to know the camp, Max sat on his bed once more. The sun had set, and the camp had settled into a quiet rhythm. The sounds of crickets filled the air, and Max felt at peace. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to rest fully, without fear or anxiety gnawing at his mind. He closed his eyes and, for a brief moment, imagined what it would be like to go back to Germany. But this time, it wasn't with the same dread he had felt before. This time, there was hope, a small but significant seed that had been planted in the soil of his heart. Max woke up the next morning to the sound of birds singing and the warm light of the sun spilling through the window. It was a feeling he had almost forgotten, a sense of peace. He rubbed his eyes, still unsure if what he had experienced the previous day was real. For so long, he had lived in the shadows of war, unsure of what tomorrow might bring. But here, in this strange American camp, everything felt different. He took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. The world outside seemed so much bigger, so much more alive than the narrow confines of the prison camps he had known. For the first time in years, Max felt like he could breathe. As he got out of bed and stretched, he noticed the bed was still warm from the night before. The softness of the mattress and the warmth of the blankets were a reminder of just how much he had been deprived of. Max had not slept in a bed like this since before the war began. The simple comforts he once took for granted now felt like luxury. He made his way outside to join the other prisoners. It was still early, and the morning mist hung in the air. The soldiers had already started their work, but the atmosphere was calm, peaceful even. Max was still adjusting to the difference in pace. Back in Germany, life had been a constant rush, filled with fear and uncertainty. But here, there was time to breathe, to notice the world around him. Sergeant Jack Thompson waved as he saw Max approaching. Good morning, Jack said with a smile. You look like you slept well. Max nodded, his face softening. I did. It's strange, he said, his voice still hoarse from the silence of the past few days. I haven't felt like this in so long. Jack laughed gently. It takes some getting used to, doesn't it? But it's good to see you settling in. Max followed Jack to the mess hall, still taking in the sights and sounds of the camp. As they entered, the smell of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air. Max's stomach growled in anticipation. It had been a while since he had tasted food like this. He took a seat at the table, and Jack slid a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. Eat up, Jack said, sitting down across from him. Max looked at the food, his hand hovering over the fork. He had never expected to be treated like this, especially not after everything that had happened. The kindness he had received here felt almost surreal. But as he took his first bite, something inside him relaxed. The food was warm, flavorful, and nourishing, everything he had not known for so long. Thank you, Max said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. Jack smiled. You're welcome. We take care of our own here. As Max continued to eat, he found himself growing more comfortable. The soldiers around him spoke casually, laughing and joking. It felt normal, human. For a moment, Max allowed himself to believe that he was part of something bigger, something better than the horrors he had witnessed in the war. After breakfast, Jack invited Max to take a walk around the camp. Max was eager to explore the surroundings. He followed Jack as they walked through the rows of barracks, passing other prisoners who were busy with their daily tasks. Some were working in the small garden, while others were helping with maintenance around the camp. Max was struck by how organized everything was. It wasn't the chaotic, harsh environment he had expected. It felt like a community, a place where people worked together for something greater. As they walked, Jack spoke to Max about the future. Once the war is over, things will change, he said. You'll have the chance to start over, to rebuild. Max listened quietly, unsure of what to believe. Could it really be possible to start over after everything? Could he return to a life he once knew? Or was that just a dream? He didn't know, but for the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility. Later that afternoon, Max was assigned to help with some of the camp's chores. He was paired with a young American soldier who showed him how to maintain the camp's small garden. Max wasn't used to manual labor, but the work felt good. It was different from the hard, back-breaking work he had done back in Germany. It was honest work, and the sun on his back felt like a sign of something new. As the day drew to a close, Max sat on a bench outside the barracks, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the air had a calm stillness to it. He thought about the life he had left behind, his family, his friends, his country, and wondered what his future would hold. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the war was defining him anymore. He wasn't just a prisoner. He was a man with a future, a chance for redemption. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to be lost in the moment, feeling the weight of the past slowly lift from his shoulders. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for now, he felt a sense of peace. Max had been given a second chance, and for the first time in a long time, he was ready to take it. Max spent the next few days getting used to life in the American camp. Each morning, the sun rose over the vast fields, and the cool breeze swept across the camp, carrying with it the sounds of birds and the gentle hum of daily activity. The contrast to the chaos of war he had known was staggering. It was a life he never imagined possible again, a life filled with simple comforts he had long forgotten. The soldiers, too, seemed at ease. They worked together, ate together, laughed together, as though there was no war happening anywhere in the world. Max could hardly believe how normal everything felt. It was as if the world had paused for a moment, allowing him to breathe, to live again. One morning, as Max was helping tend to the small garden near the barracks, Jack approached him with a smile. "How's the garden coming along?" he asked, his voice light and friendly. Max stood up straight, wiping his hands on his pants. It's nice," he said, his accent still thick, but his words clearer now. "The soil here is good. I haven't worked with soil in a long time." Jack nodded. "It's amazing what a little care can do. It's the same with people. Sometimes, all they need is someone to show them a little kindness." Max thought about that for a moment. He had never thought about himself like that. He had been so caught up in survival, in fighting just to make it through each day, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. But here, in this strange place, he was being cared for, and it was changing him in ways he couldn't yet understand. That afternoon, Jack invited Max to take a walk through the woods near the camp. Max was hesitant at first. He had not been outside the camp much, and the thought of wandering into the unknown felt unsettling. But Jack's reassuring smile made him feel safe. They walked along a narrow path, the trees overhead providing a canopy of shade. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. As they walked, they talked about life. Jack shared stories of his hometown in Oklahoma, the simple pleasures of ranch life, and the peacefulness of the countryside. Max listened intently, fascinated by the stories of a life so different from his own. In turn, Max told Jack about his childhood in Germany, the small village where he grew up, and the memories of his family before the war had torn everything apart. "I used to help my father in his bakery," Max said, a nostalgic smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The smell of fresh bread, the warmth of the oven. It was a simple life. Jack looked at him with understanding. "It sounds like a good life," he said. "But you've got a chance to make a new life now. You're not defined by what happened before. You've got a future ahead of you." Max didn't know if he believed that, but he appreciated the sentiment. For so long, he had thought his future was nothing but darkness. But here, with Jack's encouragement, he felt a glimmer of hope. The walk took them to a small clearing, where they sat down on a patch of soft grass. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. Max looked around, taking in the beauty of the landscape. It was peaceful, serene. It was hard to imagine that this land had once been touched by war. "Do you think the war will ever end?" Max asked, his voice low. Jack turned to him, his expression serious. "It will," he said firmly. "The world can't stay at war forever. People will find a way to rebuild, to heal." Max nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. It was hard to believe in the end of the war when so much of the world had been destroyed. But Jack's certainty was comforting, and Max allowed himself to imagine a future where peace was possible. As the days passed, Max continued to settle into life at the camp. He spent his time helping with various tasks, tending the garden, assisting with camp maintenance, and even learning how to fix small repairs on the barracks. He was growing stronger, physically and emotionally. The memories of his life before the war still lingered, but they no longer consumed him. He was beginning to accept that there was more to life than just survival. He had been given a second chance, and he was starting to take it. One evening, as he walked back to his barracks after a long day of work, Max found himself thinking about his family. He wondered if they were alive, if they were waiting for him to come home. He didn't know if he would ever return to Germany, but the thought of it filled him with a mixture of hope and sadness. He had been away from home for so long that he wasn't sure if he could ever go back to the life he once knew. But he had learned something here, in this American camp. He had learned that even in the darkest of times, there was still kindness, still humanity. And for the first time in years, that gave him the courage to believe in the future. Max had come to realize that while the war had taken so much from him, it had also given him something unexpected, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to live again. As the weeks passed, Max began to feel more and more like a part of the camp. The once strange sounds of daily life, the chatter of soldiers, the hum of machinery, the clinking of tools, had become familiar to him, like the soundtrack to a life he was slowly building for himself. He had started to form bonds with the other prisoners, sharing stories of their lives before the war. Some of them, like Max, had been soldiers, others civilians who had been caught up in the chaos of the conflict. They all had their own tales of loss and survival. But here, in this American camp, they had found a sense of camaraderie. For the first time, Max felt like he was not alone. One evening, after finishing his work for the day, Max found himself walking to the small clearing near the edge of the camp. The sky was a brilliant shade of orange as the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. Max had come to love these quiet moments alone, when he could reflect on his journey and the strange, unexpected peace he had found here. As he sat down on a log and looked out over the camp, he felt a strange sense of gratitude. He had arrived at this place a broken man, filled with doubt and fear. But now, with each passing day, he felt stronger, more hopeful. He could almost imagine a future for himself beyond the war, a future where he wasn't defined by the uniform he had worn or the battles he had fought. He was just Max Muller, a man who had survived, and that was enough. As Max sat in the fading light, Lost in his thoughts, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned to see Jack walking toward him, a smile on his face. "Mind if I join you?" Jack asked, his voice warm as always. Max nodded, and Jack sat down next to him. The two of them sat in silence for a few moments, watching as the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon. "You've been spending a lot of time out here lately," Jack said, breaking the silence. "Just thinking," Max replied, "about everything that's happened." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's a lot to process, but you're doing good. You're adjusting." Max smiled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't know. Some days I feel like I'm still lost, like I'm just pretending to be okay." Jack looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "It's okay to feel that way. It's part of healing. You're not pretending. You've been through a lot, and it's going to take time. But you're not alone." Max looked at Jack, surprised by the depth of his words. He had heard many things during his time in the camp, but Jack's words felt different. They felt genuine. "Thank you," Max said quietly, "for everything. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without people like you." Jack clapped him on the back, a grin spreading across his face. "Don't mention it. We're all just doing our part. But you, Max, you've got something special. You're stronger than you think." Max felt a warmth in his chest at Jack's words. It was hard to believe, but he was beginning to feel it too. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't broken after all. Maybe he could rebuild, piece by piece, just like this camp had been rebuilt after the war. As they sat together, the stars began to appear in the sky above them, twinkling like tiny beacons in the darkness. Max couldn't help but stare up at them, wondering what the future held. The war had taken so much from him, but now, in this strange new world, he was starting to believe that there was still hope. That one day he might return home to Germany, but that it wouldn't define him. He would be more than just a soldier, more than just a prisoner. He would be Max Muller, a man who had been given a second chance. And that thought, that small seed of hope, was enough to make him believe that no matter how dark the past had been, the future could still be bright. As he sat there with Jack, watching the night unfold around them, Max knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it. With courage, with hope, and with the belief that he could still make a difference in this world. The days had started to blend together in a rhythm that Max never thought he would experience again. The routine was simple, but it brought a kind of peace he had not known for years. He woke up each morning to the warmth of the sun, the soft rustling of the leaves in the trees outside, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the mess hall. Every morning, he ate breakfast with the soldiers, sharing casual conversations about anything but the war. It was strange at first, but he had grown accustomed to it. There was no fear in the air, no tension. The soldiers treated him with respect, not as a prisoner, but as a fellow human being. It felt surreal. Each day, he worked alongside the others, tending to the garden, fixing things around the camp, and helping wherever he could. It wasn't much, but it gave him purpose. The men and women around him were all different, each with their own stories, but they all shared one thing in common. They were trying to move forward. There were times when Max still thought about the war, about his family, about what had happened back in Germany. The pain was still there, but it was softer now. It no longer consumed him. He had started to believe that there was something beyond the darkness, something that he could reach if he just kept going. That belief was slowly turning into something more, hope. It was the smallest thing, but it was enough to keep him moving forward. One afternoon, after finishing his work in the garden, Max was sitting on the bench outside his barracks, watching the soldiers train. Jack walked up to him, a friendly smile on his face. "You've been quiet lately," Jack said, sitting down beside him. Max looked at him, surprised by the comment. "I guess I've just been thinking," Max replied. Jack nodded. "It's a lot to think about. But you're doing well. I can see it." Max smiled faintly. "I'm starting to believe that, too," he said, though his voice still carried a hint of uncertainty. "It's strange, isn't it? How quickly things can change." Jack looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about the speed of the change. It's about whether you're ready for it." Max pondered that for a moment. He wasn't sure if he was fully ready for everything that was coming, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to run from it. Not anymore. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, with Max doing some light work around the camp. As the evening approached, the sky began to darken, and the stars slowly emerged, twinkling above them. Max sat outside again, this time with Jack, watching the night unfold. The air was cool, and the world felt peaceful. "Do you ever think about going home?" Jack asked suddenly. Max looked at him, unsure how to respond. "I don't know," he said finally. "Sometimes I do, but I don't know what that would look like. I don't know if I can go back to what I was before the war. I'm not the same person." Jack nodded. "I understand. But that doesn't mean you can't find something new. It's about taking what you've learned, what you've been through, and using it to build something better." Max thought about that, about the possibility of starting over. It was hard to imagine, but Jack was right. He couldn't stay stuck in the past. He had to keep moving forward, even if it meant carving out a new path for himself. As the night grew darker, the sounds of the camp began to settle. The laughter of soldiers faded, and the world around them became still. Max sat there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The war, the loss, the pain. But for the first time, he didn't feel completely burdened by it. He felt like he could breathe again. The future was uncertain, but it didn't feel as terrifying as it once did. For the first time in a long while, Max allowed himself to believe that there was a way forward, a way to rebuild his life. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but it was possible. And that was enough for now. As he sat in the quiet night, the stars above him, he realized that the war had taken many things from him, but it had also given him a chance to rediscover himself. And for that, he would always be grateful. The weeks turned into months, and Max found himself adjusting more and more to his new life in the camp. Each day felt like a small victory, as he continued to rebuild a sense of normalcy that had been shattered by the war. The sounds of the camp, the laughter of soldiers, the chatter of his fellow prisoners, had become a comforting rhythm that kept the world at bay. For the first time since he arrived, Max felt like he was starting to live again. He wasn't just surviving. The work had become part of his routine, but it was the little moments that meant the most to him. It was the early mornings when he would sit on the steps of his barracks and watch the sunrise. It was the moments spent in the garden, tending to the plants with a sense of purpose. It was the conversations with the soldiers, who had become more than just guards. They had become friends. One afternoon, as Max was walking with Jack through the camp, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Across the yard, a group of soldiers were gathered around, laughing and talking, but what caught Max's attention was the way they were looking at him. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and for a moment, he felt self-conscious. Jack, noticing Max's hesitation, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, don't worry about them," Jack said, giving him a reassuring smile. "They're just happy to see you getting better. You've come a long way since you first arrived." Max nodded, still feeling a little uneasy. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the kindness. He did, but it was hard to believe that he deserved it. He had been a soldier, a prisoner, and he had seen so much darkness. It was hard to accept that he was worthy of this newfound kindness. But Jack was right. Max had changed. He had become someone different, someone stronger. And the men around him saw that. They saw the man who had endured the worst and still stood tall. As the days passed, Max began to understand that he had earned this respect. He had earned the right to feel like a human being again. One evening, after finishing a long day of work, Max sat outside his barracks, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the air had a coolness to it that made the evening feel peaceful. As he sat there, Jack joined him once more, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want a break," Jack said, handing one of the cups to Max. Max took the coffee with a grateful smile. "Thanks," he said, taking a sip. The warmth of the drink felt comforting, like a small piece of home. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky change colors. Max felt at peace in that moment, as if the war had faded away, leaving only the calm of the evening behind. "You know," Jack said after a long pause, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about your future." Max turned to him, surprised by the change in topic. "What about it?" Jack hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "You've got a second chance here, Max. I can see it. I think you're ready to start thinking about what comes next. Not just surviving, but really living." Max looked at Jack, unsure of how to respond. It was a thought he had been pushing aside for so long. The idea of a future seemed so distant, so uncertain. But as Jack spoke, something inside Max stirred. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for him after all. Maybe it wasn't too late to find a new path, to rebuild his life from the pieces that had been scattered in the aftermath of the war. "I don't know if I'm ready," Max said quietly, his voice uncertain. "I've been so focused on surviving, I haven't really thought about what comes next." Jack gave him a knowing look. "It's okay to take your time. But just remember, whatever you decide, it's your choice. You're in control now. And that's something you haven't had in a long time." Max thought about that for a moment. The idea of choice, of control, was a foreign concept to him. For so long, he had been at the mercy of the war, of the soldiers, of the circumstances. But now, in this strange camp, in this strange new life, he was beginning to realize that he had power again. He had the power to shape his own future. As the evening went on, Max found himself thinking more about Jack's words. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from the future, to stop letting the past define him. Maybe it was time to start living again, not just as a survivor, but as a person with a purpose, with dreams, with hope. The war had taken so much from him, but it had also given him a chance to rebuild, to start fresh. And that, Max realized, was a gift he would not waste. That night, as he lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, Max allowed himself to imagine the future for the first time in a long time. It wasn't a perfect vision, and it wasn't certain, but it was his. And that, in itself, felt like the beginning of something new. The days seemed to stretch on, each one blending into the next as Max continued to settle into his new life in the camp. It had become his reality, and while it wasn't perfect, it was far better than what he had known in the past. The quiet, steady rhythm of camp life was a stark contrast to the chaos he had left behind. Max spent his mornings working in the garden, his afternoons helping with various tasks around the camp, and his evenings sitting by the fire with the other prisoners and soldiers, talking about everything. And nothing at all. The people here had become his new family. They had shared so much together, from the difficult days of arriving in America to the small victories of each day. And in those small moments, Max had begun to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. One afternoon, as Max was walking toward the mess hall, he saw Jack standing by the edge of the field, his back to him. Jack was staring off into the distance, his expression thoughtful. Max approached quietly, unsure of what to say. "You all right?" he asked. Jack turned to face him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just thinking," he said. "Sometimes, it's hard to believe how much has changed, you know?" Max nodded. "I get that," he replied. "It's hard to imagine what the future holds after everything that's happened." Jack looked at him, his gaze serious now. "It's not just about surviving, Max. It's about what you do with your second chance. You've been given an opportunity to start over. Not everyone gets that." Max felt a weight settle in his chest at Jack's words. He had been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day, that he hadn't thought much about what came after. He hadn't considered the idea of a future, of building something new from the ashes of his past. "What if I'm not ready for it?" Max asked quietly. Jack took a deep breath and shook his head. "You don't have to be ready right now. Just take it one step at a time. The future will come when it's ready, but you've got to be open to it." Max thought about that as they walked to the mess hall. Jack's words had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, but also a spark of hope. Maybe he didn't need to have everything figured out just yet. Maybe it was enough to just keep moving forward, to take each day as it came and see where it led him. As they sat down to eat, the sounds of the camp filled the air. The soldiers were talking and laughing, their voices rising above the hum of the camp. For a moment, Max allowed himself to feel the warmth of the moment, the comfort of the people around him. It was so different from the cold, empty nights he had spent in the prison camps, where the only sound was the beating of his own heart, loud in the silence. But here, surrounded by people who had become his new family, the silence didn't feel so heavy. It felt peaceful. As the evening went on, Max found himself talking more with the soldiers and other prisoners, sharing stories of their lives before the war. It was strange to hear their voices, so full of life, so full of memories of a world that seemed so far away. He realized that they all had one thing in common. They were survivors. They had all been through their own battles, their own struggles, and yet here they were, sitting together, sharing a meal, and making the best of what they had. It was a small thing, but it was enough to remind Max that there was still good in the world. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Max sat outside for a while, gazing up at the stars. The camp had settled into a quiet rhythm. the sounds of the day fading into the stillness of the night. Max leaned back against a tree, closing his eyes for a moment. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the war. It wasn't a clear vision, but it was enough to make him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but it wasn't the same road he had been on before. This was a road with possibilities, with a chance to start over. And that thought was enough to give Max the strength to keep going, to keep moving forward, one step at a time. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, he was ready to find out. Max had become accustomed to the rhythm of camp life. The mornings were filled with the sounds of soldiers getting ready for the day, the clink of tools, and the rustling of uniforms. The afternoons were spent working on various tasks, some mundane and some meaningful, but all necessary for maintaining the camp. As the days passed, he found himself not just surviving but participating, feeling a sense of pride in the work he was doing. He had a purpose again, something he had been without for so long. But even amidst the calm, there was still that lingering uncertainty about the future. Max had started to feel something stirring inside him, an awareness that, while the camp had become a place of safety, he could not stay here forever. The war had taken so much from him, and the chance to rebuild his life had come with a heavy price. He had seen so many soldiers, prisoners, and civilians broken by the ravages of the conflict. But now, in this small corner of the world, he was given the chance to find peace. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was his life, and he was beginning to see it as a gift. One afternoon, as Max was working with a group of prisoners near the barracks, Jack approached him with a smile. "Hey Max," Jack said. "How are you holding up?" Max looked up from his work, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'm doing well," he replied. "I'm getting used to this. It's not what I expected, but it's not bad either." Jack nodded, clearly pleased with Max's progress. "You've come a long way, you know. I remember when you first got here. You were barely speaking, barely eating. Now look at you, helping out, working hard, and even laughing." Max smiled faintly, still not entirely comfortable with the compliment. "I guess I've learned to adjust," he said. "I'm starting to believe that maybe there's more to life than just surviving." Jack's eyes softened with understanding. "You've been through a lot, Max. But you found your way back. And that's something not everyone can say." Max didn't know how to respond to that. He had spent so much time in survival mode that the idea of a future, a real future, seemed almost foreign. He didn't know what it looked like yet, but for the first time, he was starting to believe that maybe it was possible. That night, as the camp settled into its usual quiet, Max found himself outside again, sitting on the edge of the small hill that overlooked the camp. The stars above seemed so close, so clear, as if they were watching over him. He had always loved the night sky, but tonight it felt different. There was a peacefulness to it, a calm he had not known for years. The past few months had been filled with work, with learning how to trust again, how to live again. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of the past felt unbearable. But each day, he felt a little bit stronger, a little bit more certain of the path ahead. As he sat there, Jack came up beside him, joining him on the hill. They sat in silence for a while, watching the night unfold before them. "You know," Jack said after a while, breaking the stillness, "there's a world out there beyond this camp. There's more waiting for you, Max. You just have to be ready for it." Max looked at him, feeling a sense of unease rise within him. "What if I'm not ready?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Jack turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to be ready right now, but the first step is believing that it's possible. Once you believe that, the rest will follow." Max thought about that for a long time. It was hard to imagine a life beyond the camp, beyond the memories of war that still haunted him. But Jack was right. There was more out there, and the only way to find it was to take that first step, no matter how small. The night grew colder, and Max wrapped his arms around himself, feeling the chill in the air. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't mind it. It was a reminder that the future was still ahead of him, and that he had a choice in what came next. He wasn't sure where the road would lead, but he knew he had the strength to walk it. "Thanks, Jack," Max said softly, his voice steady for the first time in a long while. Jack smiled and gave him a friendly pat on the back. "Anytime, Max. You're not alone in this." As they stood up and began walking back toward the camp, Max felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he was ready to face it. He had survived the war, and now, it was time to start living. And with that thought, he realized that, no matter what came next, he would be okay. As the days continued to pass in the camp, Max found himself settling deeper into a routine that felt more like home with each passing day. The work he had once feared now gave him a sense of purpose. The mornings began early, with the first light of dawn creeping through the trees, and Max was often already out in the garden, tending to the plants. It was a simple task, but it gave him something tangible to focus on. Something real. The soldiers, too, were adjusting to the pace of camp life. Their laughter, which had once been a strange sound to Max, now felt comforting. He began to join in, even if just for a moment, as they joked about small things, the heat, the food, the endless chores. There was a camaraderie here that he had not known in so long, and it felt like a lifeline. But despite the peace he had found, Max knew that the question of what would come next still loomed over him. The war was over for him, but it had left scars, some visible, others buried deep. He had seen too much, lost too much. He had learned to survive, but surviving wasn't enough anymore. One evening, after finishing his work, Max found himself sitting on the same hill he had visited so many times before, the one that overlooked the camp. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. The evening air was cool, and for a brief moment, Max allowed himself to just sit and watch the world around him. He was no longer the man who had arrived at this camp, broken, unsure, and desperate. He had grown into someone new, someone stronger. But the future still felt uncertain, like a road that stretched out before him with no clear destination. It was a path he hadn't yet dared to walk, and part of him was still afraid of what lay ahead. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, Jack came up to him, carrying a small box. "Hey, Max," Jack said with a smile, sitting down next to him. "I brought you something." Max looked at the box, confused. "What is it?" he asked. Jack opened the box to reveal a small wooden carving. It was a horse, meticulously crafted, the details fine and delicate. Max's eyes widened in surprise. "You made this?" he asked. Jack nodded. "Yeah. Took me a while, but I thought you might like it. I know you used to help your father in the bakery, and, well, I thought maybe this would remind you of home." Max took the carving in his hands, feeling the smooth surface of the wood beneath his fingers. It was simple, yet there was something deeply meaningful about it. "Thank you," Max said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I never expected something like this." Jack smiled, watching him carefully. "You've earned it, Max. You've earned more than you know." Max stared at the carving for a long time, turning it over in his hands. It wasn't much, a small wooden figure, but it meant more to him than Jack could possibly understand. It was a reminder of the life he had once had, the life that had been taken from him by the war, but also a symbol of the life he was building now. It was a connection to his past and a symbol of his future. "I don't know if I'll ever go back," Max said softly, his eyes still focused on the carving. "I don't know if I can go back to what I was before." Jack placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "You don't have to go back, Max. You can go forward. You've got a future ahead of you, and you're not alone in it. We're all here." Max looked up at Jack, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that it was true. He wasn't alone. He had a place here, in this camp, and maybe, just maybe, he had a place in the world beyond it as well. The night fell quietly around them, and Max sat in silence, the small wooden horse in his hands, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his heart. The future was still uncertain, but he was no longer afraid of it. The road ahead was his to walk, and for the first time, he was ready to take the first step. He didn't know what would come next, but he had hope, and that was enough. Max had spent the last few months in the camp adjusting to the rhythms of daily life, but as the weeks stretched into months, something inside him began to stir. The routines that had once felt like a lifeline were now starting to feel like a cage. The work, the camaraderie, the peaceful nights, he appreciated them. But a part of him felt like he was standing still, waiting for something more. The feeling was subtle at first, just a quiet whisper in the back of his mind, but it was growing louder with each passing day. He had survived the war. He had made it through the darkest time of his life. But now what? Was this all there was? The thought gnawed at him as he walked across the camp one morning, the sun rising in the distance, casting long shadows over the ground. It was the same as always, but today felt different. He stopped near the edge of the camp, looking out over the land. There was something about the vast expanse that reminded him of the freedom he had once taken for granted. Back in Germany, he had been a young man with dreams of his own future, a future that had been stolen from him by the war. Now, he had the chance to rebuild that future, but he wasn't sure how to begin. Max wasn't sure how long he had been standing there, lost in his thoughts, when Jack appeared beside him. "You all right?" Jack asked, his voice steady and calm. Max nodded, though he wasn't sure how convincing it was. "Yeah, just thinking," he replied. Jack stood next to him, both of them gazing out over the land. "You know," Jack said after a moment, "I've been thinking a lot about you lately. About how far you've come." Max glanced at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" Jack chuckled softly. "When you first got here, you barely spoke. You didn't trust anyone, didn't want to be here. Now look at you. You're a part of this place. You found your place here, Max. You've built something." Max felt a flicker of uncertainty. "I'm just doing what I can," he said, though his voice lacked the conviction it once had. Jack turned to him, his expression serious. "That's the thing, Max. Long enough. You've seen enough to know that there's more to life than what we've been through." Max thought about that for a long moment. It was true. He had seen so much in the past few months. The kindness of the soldiers, the resilience of the prisoners, the small moments of peace in a world that had been torn apart. But what came next? He still wasn't sure. "I don't know if I'm ready for it," Max admitted. "I've been living in the shadows for so long. I'm not sure how to step out of them." Jack placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "You don't have to be ready," he said. "You just have to take the first step. The rest will follow." Max took a deep breath, letting Jack's words settle into his mind. It wasn't that he was afraid of the future. It was more like he didn't know how to move forward after everything that had happened. He had been through so much, and yet, in a way, he still felt like he was stuck. But Jack was right. The future wouldn't come to him. He had to go to it. Slowly, Max nodded. "Maybe I can start small," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I don't have to have it all figured out, right?" Jack smiled. "Exactly," he said. "Take it one step at a time." For the first time in a long while, Max felt like he could breathe. The weight of the future didn't feel as heavy. He didn't have to know everything right now. He just had to take the first step. As they turned back toward the camp, Max felt something inside him shift. The path ahead might not be clear, but for the first time, he was ready to walk it. Whatever came next, he would face it, not as a prisoner, not as a survivor, but as someone who had a second chance at life. And that thought, that small glimmer of possibility, made all the difference. He wasn't alone. He wasn't broken. And that was enough for now. Max woke up the next morning feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. The cool morning air slipped through the cracks of the barracks, brushing against his skin as he sat up. He stretched, the movement feeling natural, effortless, almost like he was starting to return to his old self. But as he stood, something lingered in his mind. The conversation he had with Jack the night before. For the first time in a long time, Max felt ready. Ready to take that first step. Ready to move forward, even if the path wasn't entirely clear yet. He had spent so much of his life just surviving, just trying to make it through each day. But now, with the kindness of the people around him, the quiet strength he had found, and the spark of hope that had taken root deep inside, he realized that he wanted more. He didn't want to just survive anymore. He wanted to live. Max got dressed and went outside. The camp was already awake. The familiar sounds of soldiers working, prisoners tending to chores, and the soft hum of daily life filling the air. The morning sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue over the fields. It was peaceful, almost surreal. Max paused for a moment, taking in the sight. The peace he had found here, in this strange corner of the world, was something he had once thought impossible. He had been so consumed by the chaos of the war, by the pain of losing everything, that he had forgotten what peace felt like. But here, it was different. Here, he was given the chance to rebuild, to start over. It wasn't going to be easy, and he knew that. There would be challenges ahead, things he would have to confront that he hadn't fully dealt with. But for the first time, he felt ready. He was no longer haunted by the shadows of his past. He had spent so long looking back, clinging to memories of what he had lost, that he had forgotten to look ahead. But now, he knew that he had a future to build, one step at a time. As Max walked toward the mess hall, He passed by the soldiers who had become his friends. They greeted him with nods, smiles, and friendly gestures. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He was part of this place, part of this new life. Sitting down for breakfast, Max found himself laughing with the others. The conversation was light, easy, but for Max, it meant everything. It was a sign of how far he had come, how much he had changed. Jack sat across from him, a warm smile on his face. "You're looking good, Max," he said, his voice friendly. Max smiled back. Life here, how the familiar sounds and routines had woven themselves into the fabric of his days. Yet, as he stood there, he knew that this wasn't where his journey would end. The world was still out there, waiting for him to take that next step. He wasn't sure what that step would look like, but he knew it was time to start moving again. The thought of leaving the camp, of stepping into the unknown, stirred something deep inside him. Fear, excitement, uncertainty. It was all there, tangled together, but beneath it all, there was a sense of hope. He had found something here, something that had been missing for so long. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was about living, about building a future, even if that future was uncertain. Max turned as he heard footsteps behind him. Jack was walking toward him, a slight smile on his face. "You've been out here a while," Jack said as he approached. "Just thinking," Max replied. Jack nodded. "It's hard not to, isn't it?" he said, his voice thoughtful. "Everything changes when you're ready to move forward. But that doesn't mean it's easy." Max looked at him, feeling a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I've spent so much time just getting by, just surviving. I'm not sure how to make the next step." Jack smiled and placed a hand on Max's shoulder. "You're ready, Max," he said. "It's not about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about knowing that the road ahead is yours to walk. And you've already walked further than you think." Max took a deep breath, letting Jack's words sink in. It was true. He had come a long way, and the path ahead didn't have to be perfect. He didn't need to know every detail. He just needed to take that first step. "Thanks, Jack," Max said softly. "For everything." Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "No need to thank me. We're all in this together." As the two of them stood there, looking out over the camp, Max felt a sense of peace settle over him. The fear of the unknown was still there, but it no longer held him back. He had learned to trust in himself again, to believe that the future, whatever it might hold, was something he could face. The camp had given him the time and space to heal, but now it was time to take what he had learned and apply it to the world outside. Max didn't know what would come next. Maybe he would go back to Germany, or maybe he would stay in America, or maybe he would find a new place entirely. But what mattered was that he wasn't running from the future anymore. He was facing it, step by step. That night, as the stars appeared in the sky, Max felt something shift inside him. The past was still there, a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He had survived the worst, but now he was ready to live. Whatever came next, he would face it with hope, with strength, and with the belief that the best was still to come. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was someone who had a future, and that future was his to shape.